We're here today to talk about the various forms of Latin infinitives. To start, you should know that Latin infinitives have three tenses in the same way that participles did. There are present infinitives, there are perfect infinitives, and there are future infinitives. Don't worry, there are none of those weird, irregular tenses that we don't have in English, like future perfect. It's just the three basic ones: present, perfect, and future. You already know present tense infinitives. They're already embedded in your brain. You know that active present tense infinitives are the second principal part. They end with re. They get translated as amare or ponere. They get translated with just a basic to love, to put, to bring, to hear, etc. There are also present passive infinitives, and we've talked about these a couple times this year. Essentially, it's the second principal part when you take off the last E and you replace it with an I. In the third conjugation, you're going to take off the entire ERE and replace that with an I. And your translation is to be blanked. So we have amari, pony, etc. To be loved, to be put, to be brought, things like that. So one of your new tenses today is the perfect tense infinitive. We're going to first talk about the perfect active infinitive. The perfect active infinitive in English gets translated to have blanked. The formation is fairly simple, and it starts with something that you already know for perfect tense, which is the third principal part. You're going to take that third principal part and add SSE to it. So the third principal part from amare is amawi, add SSE, and it becomes amawisse. We would translate it to have loved. Posui is the third principal part from pono, ponere, add SSE to it, and it becomes posuisse, to have put. Even irregular verbs can have a perfect active infinitive because they all have third principal parts too. Fui is the third principal part from sum esse. Put it together with SSE and you get fuisse, and the translation is to have been. We actually have seen perfect tense infinitives in English. There's a very famous quote from Alfred Lord Tennyson, a British author. He wrote, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." This is probably a quote that you've seen, and now you know that it involves perfect active infinitives. So another new one for you today are perfect passive infinitives. In English, you would translate it as to have been blanked. Because it's a perfect passive infinitive, we're actually going to start with the fourth principal part, which you previously knew as the perfect passive participle. Only, we can't just have a perfect passive participle, we need to make it a perfect passive infinitive. So we're going to use it with esse, which unto itself is an infinitive. This is another instance where you have two Latin words that make up one verb form. You first saw perfect passive verbs do the same thing, where you would have positus and then sum es or est, two Latin words that make up one form. Here we have the fourth principal part of amare, amatus, and then the word esse, so those are two separate words, and our translation, to have been loved. Positus esse, to have been put. And I gave you here an example of the only irregular verb that can be made passive. Pharaoh, fere, tuli, latus. Our fourth principal part with esse becomes latus, esse, to have been brought. In the future tense, we're going to really focus on the future active infinitive. In English, it looks like to be about to whatever the verb is. I know that this is very awkward, and I can pretty much guarantee that you might have only used one future tense infinitive in your lifetime thus far. But they exist in Latin, so we have to know them in Latin. The future active infinitive is going to start with the future active participle. If you need a reminder for how the future active participle is formed, I have it here, that it's the fourth principal part when you're adding UR before the US. And then because it's not just a participle, it's an infinitive, we're going to use it with the word esse. Amaturis esse features the future active participle from amo, amare, and then we pair it with esse to make the future active infinitive. Amaturus esse, to be about to love. Positurus esse, to be about to put. Laturus esse, to be about to bring. There is a future passive infinitive, but I'm telling you right now that it only exists once in all the Latin that you're going to read in your Latin careers. So I'm going to tell you what it is, but I'm also going to tell you that you don't need to know what it is. It is a future active participle, and instead of having it with esse, you have it with ere. So it exists, but you're never going to see it. Putting all those forms together, I've given you a few samples here. For the verb do, dare, dedi, datus, your forms will be as they appear here. They are present, active, present, passive, perfect, active, perfect, passive, future active. And for future passive, you can go ahead and leave blanks instead of forms. Using the four principal parts from dokeo, dokere, here are the infinitives for this verb. And finally, using the four principal parts from capio, capere, here are the 5 infinitives that you can form from this one. Be sure to note that this is a third conjugation verb, so the present passive infinitive is not an RI ending, it's just an I. But everything else works the same as long as you have the principal parts. Hope this makes sense.